I think if you were to ask what our main influences were, it wouldn't be paintings, it would be cinema. We used to spend all our time at the cinema.
Especially when we started working together, that we were seeing films all the time. I did a teacher training course and then taught for a year, during which time I was so stressed. We just went to see a film every day.
Outside cinemas there used to be stills which represented the film. So in 6 still pictures they would give you some idea of what's happening in the film, and I think we rather thought that's what our pictures were like. They were part of a story, part of a narrative, but we were giving you this one section, or sometimes 2. You'll see in the exhibition that there are several that belong to each other in a way.
In fact, film is surreal, actually, altogether.
If we'd have ever worked out how to do it, we'd have made films instead, I suspect, except we'd have had to work with an awful lot of people and be a lot more patient than we are.
I would say that the film was more of an influence, ultimately, than art.
Labels are always hard, and I think we've tried to avoid them on the whole. But I think we stick to narrative painting rather than photorealism, which was what it was called and what other people wanted to label us. And I think that's a very different thing, actually.
I have always regarded photorealism as an abstract school, because photorealists mostly don't care too much about the image. The image is there because it's not interesting. And ours was always meant to be associative, representing a moment. So the idea that each painting you make implies what's just gone and what may happen next.
We put elements in a picture and you would find the story as much as me. But I think the wonderful thing about paintings is you can have ambiguities in the way that you can't so easily with words. Maybe you can with poetry, but not with words. And I really like that fact. You can have 2 things that look perfectly plausible, 3 things, and they go together. Surrealism was an early interest, particularly the sort of Magritte type, de Chirico type of surrealism, I think. Yeah, and that hasn't gone away. That is fun. Well, we are exploring the act of looking, but it's particularly with cameras. We've always used cameras. When we began working together, we were trying to do a picture, and we thought, what does a person look like running? So we went out and took some photographs of them. Then we wanted to see somebody screaming. People don't stay still long enough. I know there are definitions of how good a drawer you are, but I can't draw somebody screaming, with that one point. And that's how we began using photographs. And of course, a lot's changed in photography since. People believed photography as a representation of 3D, and we were very aware of using that language. We wanted the pictures to convince. If it was a person with one leg, we wanted to look like a person with one leg rather than a badly drawn person.
As this thing happened with photography, we slowly found it very easy for us to discuss the idea within the painting. We can hold up this transparency and that transparency and say, I have this idea of somebody in a road, and there's a vehicle coming up the road, and there's another figure here, and we're looking at these the light quality, and the characters in the picture, and it's very easy for us to discuss it.
Some of the pictures you're referring to are to do with photographic mistakes. The classic things you shouldn't do. A tree growing out of somebody's head, or people being cut off at the edge of the picture. But that's quite fun to explore too. Our earlier landscapes, I think, were the ones we found going up and down the A1 and around the village that we lived in Leicestershire. But we had a wonderful scholarship in the 70s which took us to America, and we travelled and fell in love with the American landscape. We'd spent this year in America with 2 small kids in a camper van.
We're on the road for all that time. We realised that we wouldn't be in a position to paint, and we decided, well, we'll take photography more seriously, and started composing these snapshots instead of just snapping away with them.
But we took a lot of photographs. Some of them were good in their own right. We had a photographic exhibition when we came back. And a lot of pictures we wanted to paint from, but we came back broke, and we were trying to support our kids, get this photographic exhibition off the ground. We left it rather late, and this one painting in the exhibition called High Time is one of the few we did about that experience. Its title is a bit like High Noon, but it's also High Time. We got down to this painting. We've since used those photographs, over the next 30 years, but that's the sort of thing that happens with photography and painting. It's circumstantial. For the last 10, 12 years, we've been going back there whenever we can, because I'd have to say we're in love with the desert particularly, but the big open spaces, the spaces that apparently people aren't in, or that there's some sense of wilderness and a great sense of being on your own, except, of course, there's always a sign that somebody's been there before you. You know, we're not brave and extraordinary climbers or trekkers, although we've seen nobody for a day in somewhere in the desert. Suddenly there'll be telegraph poles or a tyre track, or worse still, you know, a Coca-Cola can, something to say that somebody else has been there.
We go where we go with cameras. We take pictures of things we're interested in, and some which we're really interested in, some which might become interesting, some which might be useful in a painting. As we wander around American deserts, we're always taking pictures of things which we just find thrilling.
I think that in terms of the American landscape, what really intrigues us is the bumping into the wilderness by man and vice versa.
Anecdotes is another result of the fact that we continually take pictures which may or may not be of interest, which aren't in and of themselves worthy of a complete work, but taken together, there's something of the character of travelling on the continuous horizons of American landscape. The idea of it is telling a story. I mean, it's narrative. These are some of the exciting things you see. It's kind of a little bit jokey, so there's a lot of things to do with extraterrestrials in America, so there's quite a bit of it about people's attitude to extraterrestrials. There is an extraterrestrial highway, which is 100 miles, goes from Ash Springs to Warm Springs. And in between, there's a cafe which has no reason to exist other than it's on the extraterrestrial highway. The little alien is near Area 51, where people are forever trying to get into a military place where they believe extraterrestrials are being kept. This is in Nevada, and Nevada is vast. Nothing happens. Nothing. You see virtually nothing on the way. There's a thing called a shoe tree. There's a phenomenon. There are shoe trees in quite lots of places in the desert. People, for some reason, decide they've finished with these shoes and they throw them on the tree. And eventually, the whole tree is covered with shoes. There's a place called Keenan in the Owens Valley. There was a lake called the Owens Lake, which was dried up by Los Angeles taking the water. And it's left a salt pan, which is toxic. But when it was full of water, it was thought it was going to be a resort. So there were places you could rent boats and so on, and a swimming pool beside it. And the swimming pool has now died, and dead swimming pools are quite interesting.
We rejoice in the things we find, and we manipulate the image, but not the facts. All sorts of images come up in our life, and all sorts of ideas and things you want to convey, I suppose, or communicate, and some things can only be done in painting. Now, I'd be really hard put and wouldn't actually want to try and say why. And photography, especially with Photoshop, can now do some things so well that we would once only have done by painting.
We wrote recently that our attitude to painting is kind of photographic, but our attitude to photography is painterly.
I think there's still something special about being in front of a one-off object, which a painting has. It gives you a different consideration time. But then by putting a photograph in an art gallery, you're trying to give it that same consideration rather than the turnover print we get in every colour supplement. There are ways of, it's the old Roger Fry thing, of putting a frame around something. Sometimes you do it with paint and sometimes you do it with the camera. You're just trying to make what it is you want to convey visible.